United States, under the first Trump administration, unilaterally pulled out of the JCPOA, so the nuclear agreement. Some of the criticism was that it didn't include, their ballistic missile program, the support that they do for proxy organizations, terrorist organizations in the region. That, of course, is something that the Trump administration has carried forward. I think it's clear that they want to include not just not attaining a nuclear weapon in any kind of agreement, but also limitations on the ballistic missile program and cutting off funding and support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. It doesn't appear that that is something the Iranians even want to discuss, let alone concede any space on. So that's why there's so much concern that these diplomatic discussions are not going to lead anywhere, and this is still going to end up with a confrontation.
Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report, your one-stop shop for all the news and analysis coming out of the region. And I'm your host, Ali Raza Manji. It's expected in the next 12 hours that Iran and the US will meet for talks in Oman, in Muscat. The aim is to avert US action in the region, and it means that Iran will have to compromise or give up some of its nuclear program. Joining us to discuss this is Mick Mulroy. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the last Trump administration, and he joins me now. Hello, Mick.
Hello, Ali Raja. Great to be with you.
I wanted to firstly ask you, what's your assessment of where the talks are and where the talks will be tomorrow?
So there was, of course, a lot of reports that this was actually not going to happen after the requirement from Iran to switch from Ankara, Turkey to Muscat. Oman, I think many viewed that as simply a delaying tactic and indicative of how these negotiations were going to go. But apparently there was a lot of pressure put on the United States by our key partners and allies, specifically in the Middle East, to carry on and to actually sit down and have these discussions. So I think we should all hope that diplomacy rules the day here, but there's a lot of challenges ahead of us that could still end this with a direct military confrontation between the United States and Iran.
Yeah, before we talk about that potential confrontation, what are the key issues sort of that are on the table? We've talked about the nuclear program, but what is on the table from the US side? And also more specifically, I suppose, it looks like Donald Trump wants more than just the nuclear deal as part of any deal with Iran.
Yes, that's a good point. So back when the United States, under the first Trump administration, unilaterally pulled out of the JCPOA, so the nuclear agreement, some of the criticism was that it didn't include, their ballistic missile program, the support that they do for proxy organizations, terrorist organizations in the region. That, of course, is something that the Trump administration has carried forward. I think it's clear that they want to include not just not attaining a nuclear weapon in any kind of agreement, but also limitations on the ballistic missile program and cutting off funding and support for groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. It doesn't appear that that is something the Iranians even want to discuss, let alone concede any space on. So that's why there's so much concern that these diplomatic discussions are not going to lead anywhere, and this is still going to end up with a confrontation. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to see if the U.S. side is willing to concede some of those points, and of course the Iranian side as well. That's what negotiations are. They're essentially concessions on both sides to get to an agreement that both sides can accept.
Yeah, and last time, obviously, they did manage to come to an agreement under the Obama administration. The Iranians basically agreed to have people come and visit and essentially allow for their nuclear program to be surveilled to a degree. Now, there were allegations, and certainly allegations, that they had cheated on that deal. So what is it, I guess, in this situation? Because Trump is piling on the pressure. We know that there is a fleet in the Gulf, and within striking range of Iran. So kind of, I guess, is there a timeline in the way you see it that this has to be arranged? Because Donald Trump is also a man of short span. He wants to see things done quickly. I think that's a fair assessment of him.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of him as well. I think right now, not only the negotiations to happen on Friday, so tomorrow, but also for all the military assets to get to the region. We have aircraft carrier strike groups, the Abraham Lincoln, for example, I think up to 8 destroyers. We've flown probably as much air power to the region as we saw prior to the buildup of the 12-day conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. And there's reports that the U.S. is deploying yet another aircraft carrier strike group. So this is considerable firepower. I think it's clear that they're not doing this just to show a force. I think there is a real possibility it will be used. Of course, we don't know what the targets will be, but I'm sure the U.S. military, the uniformed military, is preparing several target decks, which include, for example, the regime, the nuclear programs. There's some reports that they're being rebuilt, at least imagery, open source imagery that they're being rebuilt. And then, of course, the ballistic missile launchers, which if the Iranians won't agree to curtail them, of course, it can be curtailed by military force. And I think that's definitely on the table for the United States, and we'll just have to see how these negotiations go and whether it'll be utilized.
Given the amount of force that America has at its disposal within range, what kind of sort of strikes are we looking at? What kind of targeting power do they have? Are you able to sort of lay out some of the machinery that they have in the region and what it could mean?
Well, it depends on, of course, where the targets land. In other words, they'll present several courses of action to the president. It's, generally speaking, it's usually a light, medium, and heavy type course of action. And then based on that, they'll start preparing. So it won't necessarily happen immediately. Once the president, the commander in chief in the U.S. system, makes the determination, it goes to the Pentagon, specifically to the uniform military and the combatant commands, in this case, Central Command. So then weather, timing, all those things are really left to the actual execution element, in this case, Central Command, to make the determination of where to go ahead. They obviously will utilize all of the air power that we currently have there, considering the aircraft carriers are probably in the best position, and when necessary, in a retaliation against a country like Qatar, like last time, they'll probably utilize those first. They also, of course, have these destroyers, which have guided missiles, almost impossible to intercept, already at a time when Iranian air and missile defense and air force is essentially still in ruins from the last time. So I think you'll see a lot of strikes against the air and missile defense. Then, if it's a nuclear target, depending on how substantial they want to, attack it, it could be the B-1, B-2 type bombers that we saw last time with the GBU-57s, those massive ordnance penetrators. That requires a lot of air threat mitigation, so that would be considerable. And of course, if this is also about regime change, and President Trump has made some statements to that effect, they could use those same type of munitions on any kind of safe harbor that the Supreme Leader uses in a bunker type situation. It really just comes down to what the intent of these military actions are, what they hope to achieve, based on what type, that'll base the, what type of strikes occur.
And in terms of the Iranians' capability to respond, last time you mentioned the attack on Qatar, which kind of was a bit of a damp squib because we understand there was a warning ahead of time and so on. Is there really any capability that they have? I mean, there was reports over the weekend, essentially, that a rocket was sent towards Central Command, which was shot down. I mean, what kind of capability are we talking about from the Iranians?
So I think that's a good way to put it, Ali Raza. They essentially telegraphed their response last time. So gave the U.S. every heads up they need to shoot down every incoming missile. Maybe some of the debris got through. I don't know that that's going to be the case this time. In fact, that's what Iran seems to be indicating, that they intend to attack not just these bases, which have very significant air and missile defense systems. And I believe more THAADs, that's the most sophisticated, in addition to Patriots, are already en route to the region. So that might be another reason for the delay and why the U.S. is okay with negotiations, even if they don't believe they'll go anywhere. But the Iranians could attack, of course, the aircraft carriers. Much easier to say than to do. But they also have soft targets, right? So they have a pretty substantial clandestine type apparatus in the MOIS and the IRGC Quds Force. They could target diplomatic places around the world that are vulnerable. They could sea mine the Straits of Hormuz, which apparently the parliament has already approved them to do. That would have a significant impact on the flow of energy around the world. Probably not so much impact the United States, but certainly, especially the Far East and the Indo-Pacific could be impacted. But that is something they have in their playbook, and it would cause major disruptions. And if they're of the mind that if we're going to suffer even more, we'll take everybody with us, then I think that's viable. And I'm not quite sure what the U.S. could do to stop that. The U.S. would likely be the ones to clear it, as I think the only Navy in the world capable of doing that is the U.S. Navy. But that would amplify and I think increase the tenacity of this conflict substantially. Because if you take those minesweepers through that strait, you're going to have to mitigate every possible naval threat to that very slow-moving minesweeper, which means there would be even more extensive targeting. So that's something the Iranians have to look at. But there is many options open to them that we haven't seen yet.
So, sort of wider points. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said that meeting the Iranians inherently is not the same as legitimizing them. And sort of Donald Trump taking a different tone as well, warning the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei that there is that he should be worried. So you've kind of got these different, I don't know, good cop, bad cop routines that tend to happen. And you've got Jared Kushner reportedly going to be meeting the Iranians. So, I mean, what is the difference of approach here? I think, is it sort of that Donald Trump dictates a sort of, I want to do this, and then everyone else sort of tries to make it happen in the way they know how?
Yes, I mean, this is definitely a different administration than the first one. This administration, I think the cabinet members understand that all guidance comes from the top. And there isn't, historically, the way the White House works, you have a National Security Council, which is essentially co-located next to the White House. And a lot of policy decisions go through a process where every possible facet's looked at in order for decision makers to make the most informed decision. I haven't seen that this time. In fact, there's plenty of reports that it's simply not the process anymore. The Secretary of State is also the National Security Advisor, which is an impossible two roles to fill, doing both roles as they normally are. So I think this is clearly a top-down administration where President Trump makes the decisions and his cabinet members essentially figure out how to execute them. And the U.S. military, of course, is very good at executing orders. But the policy, I think, all comes from the top and all comes from the Oval Office.
So two final points then. The IRGC has been prescribed by the EU. The UK is looking at doing a very similar thing. I wanted to know kind of what does that mean in respect, because previously in the UK, what part of the discussion has been that prescribing the IRGC isn't helpful because it just means we don't have any diplomatic link to be able to talk to them. That's been sort of the criticism in the past. And the sort of a follow-on point, I guess, and finally would also be, there's an argument that oil could be very significant to this deal over nuclear, that it could be sort of an oil for nuclear deal. I mean, how would that play out and what would it mean? So if those two sort of questions.
So designating them as a terrorist organization, it depends on just what category that is falling into, whatever country is doing so. For example, in the United States, the State Department can designate a group a terrorist organization, and that comes with sanctions and basically travel restrictions. There's no increased authority to be able to do military actions. For example, when the U.S. designated the cartels in Venezuela as a terrorist organization. Yes, we did do military strikes, but the State Department designation to that effect did not authorize those. That generally comes from Congress. So the different countries have different rules when it comes to this, and it's really those rules that makes this, whether it's significant or not, understanding that it does, in most systems, limit the diplomatic ability to converse with those groups. That's why so often, if a group is prescribed, as you called it, then it's the intelligence services that do a lot of the backroom diplomacy. For example, when the U.S. was talking to Hamas, it was done through the CIA director, at least under the U.S. system. Once these groups are designated in any form as a terrorist organization, it's usually then the CIA who takes the lead. So it's not to dignify the discussion with the actual, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or in our case, the State Department.
Great. Mick Mulroy, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.